Welcome to the Voice of Charity, answering the call to serve. I have the honor, I'm Sally Blount, of being the President and CEO of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Thanks for joining us. As many of you know, Catholic Charities is one of the region's largest human service providers. We welcome thousands of people each day, regardless of their faith, their race, their gender, their ethnicity. We are here to serve. And we think about the fact that we actually have two missions. One is this mission of charity to serve people in need, but the other we call the mission of mission engagement. How do we engage the church in our work? Now that engagement includes service and volunteering, but we understand it also includes discussion and debate about the needs of the poor, the face of poverty in our region, and the economic and social challenges we face in addressing it. And most importantly, the spiritual call to people of faith to be present to the suffering, to serve, and to advocate on behalf of those in need. So in this new conversation series we're starting, Answering the Call to Serve, we will be engaging in dialogue with Catholics from across the Archdiocese. From a variety of backgrounds and perspectives, our goal is to discuss how their faith has been formed, how they've come to understand the call to serve, and how the Holy Spirit is working within them now in fighting for a better world. In this episode, I'm very excited to welcome Jim and Molly Perry. They're longtime members of the St. Clement Parish. You have 3 grown children, 2 grandchildren. Jim, I know you've been a co-founder and you're now a senior advisor at the private equity firm Madison Dearborn. And Molly, I know that you have worked tirelessly on behalf of mother and children for years and years and years and years. And I am just, thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you. One of the things we talked about was just beginning to get a sense of your own faith journey and how the family you grew up in may have sort of shaped how God began to call you at an early age. I don't know if one of you might be willing to start by sharing sort of a story. From how God
well, for me, so
real.
I'm the oldest of 6. My mother was a first-generation Irish woman, and very devout Catholic woman, and high school educated. That's about it. We grew up in a Levittown in central New Jersey. But being the oldest of 6, right, I'm probably wired maybe more for faith, I suppose, just as it's always, you have to set the example, son, sort of thing. But I don't know, early on, it was an important part of my growing up, and I was very, very lucky. We had a wonderful pastor at our little church in Hazlitt, New Jersey, Father William Bausch, who was a prolific writer and an incredible homilist, and he really spoke to faith from the intellect. You know, it was both a deep spirituality, but he also an incredibly sort of bright thinker. And so growing up through my teenage years, I had the benefit of, wrestling with some of these questions, but having almost a spiritual advisor and a pastor, and very close to the family. We'd come oftentimes over for dinner. And read many of his books, some of them written for adolescent young, men and women wrestling with all those classic adolescent issues. So it was kind of baked in a bit for me, and watching my parents and the way they lived their lives among neighbors, family. We had a great aunt, who became an invalid. My mother cared for her, like a child for many years. So watching that sort of faith commitment and action in some ways was I suppose, part of it too. But Father Bausch was an important influence on me. And there's a story I'll tell later about my reconnecting with him well past his retirement, and how that made a big difference in my own life as a father and as a parishioner at St. Clement. We'll talk about that.
All right, we'll make sure we talk about that. How about you, Molly?
I would say the biggest influence on faith, passing down the faith, is my dad. He always had a very strong faith and always relied on prayer. and we went to Mass every Sunday. My mom's a convert. She was a Presbyterian, but she went to Catholic school in Washington, D.C. She went to Immaculata, which was that was a junior college. But she also went to Belmont Abbey in North Carolina, where she met my dad. And she is the one that was always, in the community, just among friends, anybody that needed, like for Thanksgiving, we'd always have I'd be like, who's coming this time? But my mom was is a very loving, welcoming person, and so is my dad. They're beloved by whomever they come in contact with, and so they were a big inspiration to me. And we just went to Mass every Sunday. But I definitely had, I feel like, a gift of faith. I think it is a gift early on. I remember having these thoughts like, how could, Jesus be put to death? I mean, if they knew he was God, how could they do that? I had those kinds of thoughts. And just also like different points, just being like, yeah, he's real. So, and I kind of thought, yeah, most people have those thoughts, but it felt, I definitely had that strong belief as a child.
Wow.
I think, yeah.
That is a gift. And then let's fast forward, because now this is where you've built your life, and you have built a powerful ministry of service. And I want to begin to, have all of us learn from that. So when did the trigger start moving on each of you? You had great foundations; those were gifts that both of you had. But when did the gears really start moving for you to understand the call to serve in new ways, and for you to understand much more deeply what God was going to ask of you?
Well, coming to a new city from the East Coast, but as part of a group of young people that were going through this internship program, they made a lot of fast friends. But it was
you got an MBA at the wrong
night,
school.
so I was working. Yeah, there you go. At Booth at night, right? But working all day and then going to school at night, and it was pretty fast and furious. And then, of course, then beginning as a young guy, I was 23 years old when I started in the venture capital division, and it was flat out, for 10 years. But I made it a point to stay close to my faith. I was, I attended Mass. I became a member of St. Clement Parish in 1985, which is where we ultimately met, and it's been our parish ever since. And I think an important touchstone for me was and still is serving, directly, so being present with someone in need, and when I had no wealth to speak of back in those days, but I, to the extent I could, I made sure to volunteer in ways where I could be present, again with the poor, and I happened to intersect with the St. Clement parishioner, the community, when they were a part of forming the Lincoln Park Community Shelter back around 1985 in partnership with Lincoln Park Press and St. Paul's around the corner, and I had always had an interest in that problem of homelessness. I wrote an extensive piece, a number of pieces in college about the problem in Philadelphia, and so I always wrestled with the problem, and so it was a natural thing for me to become more involved in that. And it was exciting to be a part of something like that, building, a way to serve the community among fellow believers in the basements of our own churches, and being with the homeless, sleeping with them, alongside of them on a
so you do the overnight
foam
shift.
Mat, the overnight, and preparing meals for them and all that sort of thing. And so that had some really wonderful encounters and experiences, doing that. I think that's, that just no matter what else you do, right? And of course, the nature of our ability to help has changed over the years, but there's no substitute, I think, for being present, for the one-on-one, for learning to understand, the humanity of the person you're serving, which cannot happen with merely writing a check, or it's hard to enable that if it's just about check writing. So I think that's always the struggle, I think, for all of us in our busy lives. How do we, live with, among, relate to, those in most need, that we're called as Catholics, that we are radically called, to serve and to engage with. That's the radical problem of the gospel, right?
Well, and in fact, you're right. Because Jesus makes two things really clear: give away your money, right? And he makes really clear, be fully present, right? Not, be with the other, look into their eyes, eat a meal with them, share a meal with them. But you were doing that early on, even in those busy years.
Yeah. It was
That's great spiritual grounding.
Friendships. Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
A
I wish I could say I was doing. I'm really impressed. To make time for that in your 20s, a lot of people don't.
It was good because we that was part of the, each of the kids would come with me occasionally. We'd do the overnight with them, and so it was a bit of a camping out experience for them, with me, you see. So that was, and we would serve meals to them, to the shelter guests, as periodically, and so it was a wonderful mission and a great asset for our family in some ways, and so we support it to this day, and we stay close to that mission.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
But I see, like, just doing that with our kids. They loved playing bingo with the guys, and serving the meals and making the menus, and then they'd invite their friends to do it, and it was just like a fun thing to do once a year as a family.
Well, it should be joyful. It's really, it's an opportunity.
Well, that's why community is important too, which is, I think, something you're bringing up by doing, whether you do it in family or with a community of others. It is hard to step beyond ourselves and to be fully present to the other. And the idea, one of the things we've talked a lot about at Catholic Charities is that we have to build community to help people do that, right? To help, and that,
Absolutely.
and we teach each other, which is what I'm also learning from your story. Is, that's the beauty of marriage, right? Is you teach each other as you go along.
She's teaching me every day, it seems.
But I would say, like at St. Clement, Father Peter is doing just a great job with that right now, because there's so many community-based things that people can do together. We always had like service day, but there's opportunities to learn together and then serve together, and
pray together.
there's like this incredible evangelization that's going on there. So everyone's learning together and getting to know one another, and it's really awesome.
That's beautiful. Jim, you'd mentioned early in our conversation when we were talking about your childhood, your boyhood pastor, Father Bausch, and that he came back in an important way.
So I had lost track of him. After high school, I went off to college, and then to Chicago, and he stayed. My mother stayed in relatively close contact with him, but I hadn't heard from him or spoken to him until I learned that he'd retired in the little Jersey Shore beach town of Point Pleasant, only a 5-minute drive from where we would go every summer for a week or two, Spring Lake, New Jersey, to be with family. And so I called him, I reached him by phone and said, can I take you to lunch? It's been a long time. I just want to catch up with you. So that began just a tradition. Every August, we would have lunch at Spike's in Point Pleasant, and a flounder sandwich, the two of us, and would just talk about his life. And at this point, he's now 96 years old, and still a mind that is as sharp as ever. And we had these wonderful talks about his career, his life as a pastor, every summer. And one year, I think it was in around 2001, I said, you've been this accomplished author, written 25, 30 books, a acclaimed homilist, a wonderful pastor, and with friends and fans now all over the world. What's the one thing that you're most proud of, for all these many years? And he said, well, in 1973, I set up a a morning, we called it the morning mission. It was on Thursdays for us, and it was an opportunity for men to come together at 6:30-ish, 6:30 in the morning for half an hour to do a version of morning lauds. So to sing psalmody, simple psalmody, to hear one of their brethren give a reflection on the forthcoming Sunday gospel, to share the Eucharist, and to leave, maybe have a cup of coffee afterwards, and then to move on and to their day job. And he said, to this day, it's still going strong. Right? So at that point, almost 30 years later. So I said, give me the liturgy for this. I'm going to try to bring this back to my own parish. And so with the help of Father Tom Hickey and a bunch of other St. Clement parishioners, we launched a version of this, our Tuesday morning mission, now known as Communio in our parish, in January of 2003, and it's been going strong for 21 years now. And we have a couple hundred guys in orbit on any given Tuesday. We may have anywhere from 15 to 30 men, and we sing some simple plain chant and psalmody. We have a wonderful former professor of chant and medieval history from Notre Dame, Dr. Calvin Bauer, who wrote our liturgical. For the liturgical season, we have a different liturgy, but in ordinary time, we sing the chants to the point now where we've essentially memorized them, and it's led to friendships, and we have volunteer activities together. We have dinners every couple of months with a speaker. We're going to have you come if you at some point soon, Sally, and. It's been a real cornerstone for my own faith life, and I think for many of the men there. But it's again notion of praying together and building friendship in faith, and all the many wonderful but completely unknowable emanations from that, whether they're friendships or opportunities to volunteer or other small groups that have spun out and from it in other parishes and within our own parish. So it's been one of the great blessings. So still haven't had Father Bash come out to Chicago. He refuses to come out.
He's still going strong.
It's amazing. It's incredible. He's still writing, still giving sermons, and it's truly one of the great blessings in my life to have known him. So.
Well, I think that brings up another important point again that we keep learning over and over again: the power of building community as a form of service.
Right, which is what Father Peter is really committed to doing. St. Clement too.
And how it just keeps giving back.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward, you guys.
Yeah.
Life has been good to you, we've had these discussions multiple times.
Yes.
Life has, Jim, your work has created a lot of value for your wealth for yourself and a lot of other people. Molly, your kids are beautiful kids. They've had wonderful lives, and so you find yourselves at a point in life where you get to sit back and say, golly, haven't we been blessed. So how and one of the things we were talking about a little before, and a lot of us struggle with, is when you see yourself in that place, you're kind of going, the words of God sit in the back of your mind, though, right? It's easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy person to make it into heaven, right? And so how do you, I know you all have struggled a lot with, well, how are you being called to serve at each phase? So how do you think about it now? How are you putting the pieces together? Because you guys are doing a lot, and I learn more every time I speak to you.
Well, you have to, in all humility, appreciate that, it's completely, for me, I feel undeservedly blessed. I've had great fortune just to being in the right place at the right time, and the Gospels. There's some admonitions there. The Gospel passage that always haunts me is the one of the rich fool always trying to build bigger barns to store more and more of his wealth, his grain, and yet he could be called on that very day that he's building that next barn. What are you doing to return these great blessings, the gift that you've gotten, and it kind of snuck up on us as it would, in this, I guess this sort of tidal wave of assets that have moved into the private equity and venture capital world over the last 30 years, and the bull market on average that we've had since. So I think probably in the early 2000s we started to take the giving back question more seriously, and for us, it has revolved around how can we use our assets to help the institution of the church do the great work that it's called to do. And when I say the institution, Catholic Charities, the Archdiocese of Chicago, its school system, the many parishes that have some that serve the middle class or lower income, communities that are hard to sustain, providing some experience and contribution to some of those big questions that the Cardinal and his staff wrestle with about how to allocate its own scarce resources to support the Archdiocese. And then many other lay apostolates that have been springing up, over the last 20 years, 10, 15, 20 years. It's an exciting time in some ways in that regard. So we've done a lot of investing in lay apostolates and both for-profit and non-for-profit that are working to evangelize, to spread the good news and to bring more people into faith. And our view is that is not only great for the people, the souls of those that encounter the gospel, but also for our civic society. How do we make a stronger, society of people here in our city, in our state, in our country? And religion, we know from way back. The founders talked a lot about it, how important a religious culture is to a well-functioning civic society. So, we want to contribute to the civic society. We think that doing that through this great vehicle of the church is a way to do that efficaciously. Is how we think about it. But it's evolving for us, and there are all sorts of constraints that we all have, with respect to our investments, how much we can access from investments that we've made, and how responsibly and can we deploy it. And so that's there's a whole conversation we can have around those questions. But we wrestle with those. What are we called to do with the great blessings we've had, and how do we best use those blessings? That's the core issue, core question.
When did it start occurring to you, Molly, that you guys were going to have to start thinking in a new way? Was it the same time as Jim, or were there other influences on you?
Well, I do remember when we were dating, he asked me this question.
Oh, jeez.
He said, this is so funny. It was like a test. What would you do if you won?
What's the starting lineup of the Chicago Bears?
No, what was that movie? Diner. But he asked me, what would you do if you won the lottery? And I said, well, I'd definitely give some to my parents, and I'd make sure my brothers had something, and then I would be like, okay, well, who else needs something? Because my parents always taught us, as long as you, as far as money goes, as long as you feel, if you're comfortable, if you're not worried about your next meal or your next, paycheck, that is enough, and that you'll be happy. That's getting more and more and more is not necessarily going to bring you happiness. So you just don't want to have money as a constant worry. So I and my parents were extremely generous to us growing up. If we want something, if they could give it to us, they would. But we kind of knew well enough not to ask if it was, out of the question.
Yeah. So when amid the different things you've been investing in, the different things you've been contributing to, as you sort of weave this really interesting tapestry, in the quiet hours when you guys are praying, how do you hear God talking to you about it these days? Like how do you hear Him and experience Him in this chapter?
Well, there's one thing that happened to me. There was a time when I was literally like, okay, I have some time on my hands, and I really wanted to know, okay, what So I kept asking in prayer, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And you had mentioned we were supporting Aid for Women, which is pregnancy help centers. Like, I think there's 5 of them now. And we went out to meet the executive director, and she said, oh, you asked her the question, which you ask a lot. If you could do anything, what is your top thing that you would do? And she wanted to expand the residential living portion so that pregnant women had a place to go if they had no place to go while they were pregnant and for a while right after they had the baby. And so we got more involved in that. And I think you mentioned to me, why didn't you get more involved with Aid for Women? And I kept praying about it, and I was like, I think God really wants me to do that. So after we met with Sue one time, I said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to devote my time to helping you. And so she looked at me and she's like, what? So I joined the board, and the main thing they need help with is fundraising, which is I'm always like, what? I'm like,
why not to do more of that?
But I've learned a lot about it just from our experience watching Jim, and so there's always this core group of people that we go back to who we care about a lot of the same things, but I'm sure they're kind of like, oh my gosh, there's another thing that Jim and Molly want us to give to or whatever. But we partner with a lot of people that care about the same things, and it is fun to do things together and support a lot of the same apostolates. But that's when I felt like, okay, actually felt like I got a direction, and
that's a beautiful example though, Molly, because I think sometimes people forget fundraising is not easy. It does put you on the line, and it does ask you to take your relationships in new places. And I think you're lifting up that notion of that can be a call, and sometimes, like as you said, it's not always easy to ask for money. And what I hear you saying is you answered God's call to lean into that. And for some people, that is the call. I mean, service takes so many different forms. And yet I think of how the work you all have done of helping us raise money for Catholic Charities, how you help us find our ball chairs every year, right? And how successful that model's become. Just yesterday, I was talking to Josh Hale. He's going to come speak in a course I'm teaching on nonprofits.
There's no one better than Josh.
And I was and Josh's gift is fundraising, right? And look at what he's done with Big Shoulders, right? And so I do think it's important to recognize that one of the ways God calls people of wealth to serve is through fundraising.
And one of the reasons what makes it easier is if you're doing something good and you invite somebody to join you in doing that, if you think of it as like, well, I'm giving them an opportunity. So it's not like I'm just saying, okay, could you, like as a favor kind of to me, support this. It's just kind of like how you approach it. So I learned that from you.
Well, it's an invitation, right?
It's an invitation.
Yeah, it is
and
an
you,
invitation.
I was always
as
like,
I said to a friend who said, another thing, Jim, I said, just consider me the mailman. I'm just presenting you the opportunity.
The
you
mailman.
don't have to. It's just
Oh yeah, he's approached me about that too.
yeah.
People who don't know it, Jim chaired the search committee when they were looking for a new head of
That's
Catholic
right.
Charities.
That's right.
And as thanks for that, he agreed to head our fundraising
that
committee.
was the payback. That was my penance.
I constantly am inspired each time I see you all, and I learn something new that you're contributing to and putting your hearts into. And I have a lot of humility because I know there are a lot, and I know even getting you to tell us some of these things isn't something that you go out and do all the time. So I just want to thank you both for being willing to meet with me and begin to tell that story, because I think there's so many deep and rich stories about answering the call to serve. And what I hear from both of you is just this: you were given the gift of faith, you were given parents who helped build it in it, but you've been faithful to it, and you've held yourselves accountable to it, and you've built a beautiful family of faith around it and community. And I've benefited from that, and Catholic Charities has benefited from that. And I know the Archdiocese, Jim, you've been in some of the tough
It's not like we figured it all out,
choices.
that's for sure.
No,
But,
but you've been
every
servants
day
of
is
God.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we do feel like we we are called to give back and to do it as intelligently and as wisely and as prudentially as we can, and that's always the challenge. You know, where do you invest your time in that next dollar, and it's never simple, but
Well, the flip side is if you don't do it, there's no way you're going to get through that needle.
Oh, that's beautiful. You guys, thank you for being willing to sit down.
Thanks, Sally, for your
and
leadership.
be in this dialogue. I think the way I want to close it, Jim, again, one of these other providential ways you've touched me, and I've told you this story before. I think it's Paul Murray, the Irish Dominican, was giving a talk at St. Clement, and a lot of things were happening, but there was a moment in his talk when he introduced me to a prayer of Mother Teresa's, in which she says, it all starts with silence. The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. And the fruit of service is peace.
A lot of truth to that.
And it is a beautiful prayer. And in that moment, as I've told you, I experienced the grace of Mother Teresa coming and just walking alongside me in a new way to help me in the work at Catholic Charities. So I'm grateful for your ability to connect people and create conversations, both of you, and for your partnership and all the things you're doing on behalf of the faith. So thank you for being willing to come and be in dialogue about that.
Sure.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for your service to have such a great leader at Catholic Charities. So we're very lucky.
Well, blessings, and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, hope to. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.